By the early 2020s, the balance of military power began shifting in ways few nations fully understood. For decades, dominant forces relied on a predictable hierarchy. Tanks shaped the ground fight, fighter jets secured the skies, and artillery created the space in between. But on battlefields stretching from Eastern Europe to the Middle East, a new threat began rising. A threat that ignored borders, bypassed traditional defenses, and challenged the very idea of air superiority. Drones, once dismissed as small and insignificant, rapidly evolved into one of the most disruptive forces modern warfare had ever seen. They appeared everywhere at once, in forms no doctrine had prepared for. Small quadcopters hovered above trenches, tracking movements that once went unnoticed. Medium-range unmanned aircraft delivered precision effects without risking pilots. Long-range drones struck far behind enemy lines, disrupting logistics and exposing vulnerabilities that heavy weapons once concealed. Within a few short years, drones became the catalysts of a new era. An era where the most dangerous threats were no longer the biggest, but the smallest. Militaries worldwide realized they were facing something far beyond an emerging tool. They were witnessing a shift in the character of war. Armored vehicles that once advanced confidently across open fields were forced to hide beneath camouflage. Artillery crews that once set up stable firing positions relocated constantly to avoid overhead surveillance. Even air bases, symbols of national power, found themselves vulnerable to low-cost unmanned aircraft that slipped through defenses with surprising ease. The drone revolution struck with a speed and decisiveness no major power anticipated. Traditional air defense systems, optimized for fast-moving jets or ballistic threats, struggled to detect tiny, slow, unpredictable objects. Radars tuned for large signatures found themselves overwhelmed by targets smaller than birds. Missiles costing hundreds of thousands of dollars were fired at drones costing a few hundred. And when those shots succeeded, the defender still lost the exchange. That economic imbalance fueled the rise of drone warfare. Attackers had every incentive to launch more unmanned aircraft. Defenders had every reason to conserve resources. The battlefield became a contest of numbers, cost efficiency, and unpredictability. Drones created a form of attrition that tanks, artillery batteries, and manned aircraft were not built to handle. In Ukraine, Yemen, Syria, and parts of North Africa, drones became tools of reconnaissance, precision strike, psychological pressure, and operational disruption. As their numbers grew, so did their impact. A coordinated drone swarm could paralyze a brigade. A lone reconnaissance drone could expose an entire defensive line. A handful of long-range platforms could threaten an oil facility, a command center, or an air defense radar. Battles that once belonged to pilots and armored commanders now hinged on the decisions of drone operators, engineers, and algorithm designers. This rise forced militaries to confront a difficult question. What weapon could stop drones efficiently, at scale, and at a cost that made sense? The answer did not exist in a single missile system or a new form of armor. It emerged slowly, shaped by urgent battlefield lessons and accelerated research around the world. Nations recognized that they needed something fundamentally different, something faster than a pilot, cheaper than a missile, more adaptable than a radar, and capable of stopping dozens of threats at once. What they needed was a shield. Not a single defensive weapon, but an entire ecosystem of integrated systems designed to detect, identify, track, and neutralize drones with unprecedented speed and accuracy. This shield would not rely on explosive warheads or massive interceptors. It would rely on energy, algorithms, and autonomous defenders. It would mark the beginning of a new defensive revolution. At the heart of this revolution sits one of humanity's oldest technological ambitions: directed energy. For decades, militaries dreamed of weapons that fired beams instead of bullets. Lasers represented speed, precision, and near-limitless ammunition, held back only by technical barriers. But as power generation improved, optics stabilized, and targeting systems advanced, lasers moved from the realm of science fiction to field testing. Suddenly, the idea of destroying drones with focused beams of light became a practical reality. Lasers offered a simple promise: eliminate drones without relying on expensive munitions. A single laser unit could disable drones with shots costing only a few dollars. It didn't need to reload. It didn't require a supply chain of warheads. It simply needed power. Nations from the United States to Israel began testing mobile laser platforms capable of disabling drones within seconds. As the technology matured, lasers transitioned from experimental prototypes into active components of modern air defense. But lasers alone weren't enough. They struggled in fog, heavy rain, or dust. They required precise tracking, and they could only engage one target at a time. Militaries needed a second tool, one that could neutralize multiple drones simultaneously. That tool emerged in the form of high-power microwave systems. Unlike lasers, microwaves did not burn through drones. They overwhelmed them. A powerful microwave blast could fry circuitry, disable navigation modules, and render drones inert without ever touching their airframes. Even swarm formations, once the greatest threat, could be disrupted by a single well-aimed pulse. Microwave technology quickly became a complementary weapon to lasers. Where lasers attacked the physical structure of a drone, microwaves targeted its electronics. Where lasers required precision, microwaves offered area defense. Together, they formed a dual threat to drones, one targeting the body, the other targeting the brain. Yet neither of these systems would matter without a third breakthrough: artificial intelligence. Modern battlefields are saturated with complex signals. Drones vary in size, speed, altitude, and intent. Identifying them requires distinguishing real threats from decoys, animals, debris, or atmospheric interference. No human operator can track dozens of small objects in real time across multiple sensors. AI solved this. By fusing radar, infrared, acoustic, and optical data, AI created a unified picture of the battle space. It predicted drone trajectories, prioritized threats, and allocated defensive resources instantly. What once required minutes of human judgment now happened in fractions of a second. AI transformed lasers and microwaves from isolated tools into elements of a cohesive system. The final piece of the shield came from an unexpected source: drone-on-drone combat. If drones were efficient attackers, they could also become efficient defenders. Interceptor drones, fast, agile, purpose-built aircraft, began emerging from laboratories and test ranges worldwide. These interceptors chased enemy drones, disabled them with non-lethal tools, collided with them when necessary, or trapped them with nets. When guided by AI, they functioned as autonomous hunters. Together, lasers, microwaves, AI, and interceptor drones formed the foundation of a new defensive architecture, one that could end the era of cheap, unstoppable drone warfare. But the real transformation began when militaries found a way to fuse these capabilities into a single, layered shield. At its core, this shield represents a shift in military philosophy. The objective is no longer to intercept a handful of drones. It is to neutralize massed attacks, saturation strikes, and autonomous swarms. The goal is no longer to engage drones one at a time. It is to dominate the aerial environment continuously. This shift marks the start of a new technological race, one that could fundamentally reshape the future of warfare. And to understand how this shield might end the dominance of modern drones, one must examine how these layers, detection, disruption, energy engagement, and interception, work together as a unified system. To understand how this next-generation shield could overturn the drone revolution, one must look beyond the individual components and focus on the network that binds them. For decades, militaries viewed air defense as a sequence of isolated tools, radars, missiles, guns, and human operators working in coordinated cycles. But drones shattered that model. Their small signatures, unpredictable paths, and overwhelming numbers demanded a shift from traditional defense to something far more adaptive, automated, and layered. The emerging anti-drone shield represents that shift. It is not a single weapon, it is an ecosystem. Its first layer begins long before a drone reaches a defended area. Detection is the outer ring of the shield, and it is where the most dramatic changes are unfolding. Traditional radars, designed to track aircraft with large radar cross-sections, often miss small drones entirely. Even when they detect them, they struggle to differentiate between a drone and environmental noise. But with modern sensor fusion, militaries now weave together multiple forms of detection: short-range radar, infrared cameras, acoustic sensors, and optical systems, into a single, AI-driven picture. This fusion gives defenders something they lacked for years: certainty. They can identify drones sooner, track them more accurately, and understand their intentions with unprecedented clarity. The sky, once filled with confusing signals, becomes legible. This early clarity is what allows the next layer, disruption, to activate effectively. Electronic warfare sits at the center of this layer. Many drones rely on communication links to stay airborne, navigate, or coordinate with operators. Others depend on GPS for guidance. By jamming these signals, the shield attempts to disorient drones before they reach critical areas. Some drones spiral out of control, others hover helplessly. A few switch to backup navigation modes, but even these become predictable once tracks their adjusted behavior. Electronic warfare doesn't always neutralize the threat completely, but it does force drones into degraded states, making them easier targets for the inner layers of the shield, and in mass attacks, every early disruption matters. The fewer drones that survive this stage, the easier it becomes to manage the remainder with energy weapons and interceptors. When disruption fails, or when drones operate autonomously, immune to jamming, the shield transitions to its most decisive tier: energy engagement. High-energy lasers take aim with precision, focusing intense beams on vulnerable points such as rotors, sensors, or airframes. Within seconds, the drone falters, components overheat, structures melt, control surfaces deform. Lasers deliver silent, instant results, and they do so at a fraction of the cost of traditional interceptors. Yet lasers aren't alone. High-power microwave systems stand beside them, offering wide-area engagement. Instead of burning through airframes, they overwhelm electronics, disabling multiple drones in a single burst. Where lasers provide surgical accuracy, microwaves provide blunt pressure. The combination covers both precision needs and saturation scenarios, creating a flexible, resilient defense. If any drones survive energy engagement, the final ring activates: the interceptors. Drone-on-drone combat replaces missiles in this last-ditch phase. Small unmanned defenders race into the sky, guided by AI through real-time tracking data. They maneuver aggressively, close distance quickly, and disable intruders either through controlled impact or specialized non-lethal tools. This inner layer is crucial. It ensures the shield remains effective even when drones slip past the outer defenses. Together, These layers create something that did not exist even a decade ago, a continuously operating defensive bubble, one capable of reacting instantly to swarms that once overwhelmed entire battalions. Every moment of the engagement cycle, from detection to interception, is enhanced by algorithms that reduce decision times from minutes to seconds. And in the world of drone warfare, where threats move unpredictably and appear without warning, seconds are everything. This new architecture represents more than technological evolution. It represents a philosophical shift in how militaries think about air control. Air superiority is no longer defined solely by fighters patrolling the skies or sophisticated missiles guarding key areas. It is defined by persistent defensive presence, an unblinking system that monitors, evaluates, and responds even when no human is watching directly. This persistent defense changes battles at a fundamental level. Drones no longer enjoy guaranteed access to the battlefield. Their greatest advantages, cost, unpredictability, and volume, begin to erode. When a defender can neutralize dozens of drones at negligible cost, attackers face a crisis of strategy. They must invest in more sophisticated drones, equip them with stealth features, or coordinate complex maneuvers, all of which increase cost dramatically. In effect, the anti-drone shield reverses the advantage that made drones so disruptive. The economics flip. The defender gains efficiency, the attacker loses it. Such a shift carries strategic consequences. Armored units that once lived under constant drone surveillance gain freedom of movement. Artillery batteries, previously exposed to aerial spotting, can reposition more confidently. Naval vessels operating near contested coastlines gain defensive breathing room against maritime drones. Even air bases, once paralyzed by long-range drone attacks, become far more secure. This new freedom affects planning at every level. Armies can execute maneuvers that were previously too risky. Command posts can operate closer to contested zones. Supply lines, often the first targets of drone campaigns, become harder to disrupt. With drones denied their once critical role in exposing and striking vulnerable positions, the tempo of operations shifts back toward traditional concepts of maneuver, surprise, and concentrated effect. And adversaries will inevitably search for weaknesses, stealth drones, electronic deception, or multi-axis approaches designed to confuse AI. But no defense is absolute. The strength of the shield lies not in perfection, but in overwhelming adaptability. It does not rely on one weapon, one sensor, or one method. It relies on the constant interplay of multiple tools, each ready to compensate for the limitations of the others. This redundancy is what gives the shield its resilience. It is flexible where traditional defenses were rigid. It is scalable where older systems were limited. It is affordable where missile-based air defense struggled to sustain long conflicts. For the first time since the drone revolution began, defending forces possess a system that tilts the balance back in their favor. Drone warfare will continue, but the age of cheap, unstoppable swarms is ending. The next chapter will be shaped by advanced unmanned systems, integrated defenses, and the technologies that bind them. The anti-drone shield represents the turning point, an era where defense catches up to offense and, in many ways, begins to surpass it. In the long arc of military history, every dominant weapon eventually meets its counter. The rise of drones redefined the battlefield. Now, the rise of this shield, precision-based, energy-driven, and algorithmically controlled, promises to redefine it once again. The weapon that could end drone warfare is not a missile, not a gun, and not a single machine. It is the network that links energy, intelligence, and autonomy into one cohesive force. And as that force matures, It will set the conditions for the next era of military power, one where drones no longer dictate the terms of battle, but operate within the constraints of a defense built specifically to defeat them.